Dear learners and listeners, welcome to this session. Today's session, we will talk about changing nature of international conflict. I am Dr. G. Uma, working as an assistant professor in the School of Gender and Development Studies, Indira Gandhi National Open University. I am the course coordinator of this course. Let us discuss with this unit, changing nature of international conflict. In the previous unit, we have clearly understood the term conflict. All of us must be hearing this term conflict in a day-to-day basis. In our daily life, the term is used to express a variety of things, both in terms of activities and emotions. Like even sometimes we will have a small fight and immediately we use the term conflict. I had a conflict with someone for something. So, the term is widely used, but with regard to international context, international conflict context, the term is used for fight, debate, argument, contest, war, clashes between or among groups, terrorism, insurgency, religious extremism and other similar acts. The origin of the word conflict can be traced back to the Latin word configere, which means to strike together. Historically, the literature on international relations focused on interstate armed conflict or war between or among states as a dominant form of international conflict. Wars, as the famous strategic thinker Karl von Clausewitz puts it, were an extension of politics to achieve political objectives. Unquote. No matter how clearly one thinks, it is impossible to anticipate precisely the character of future conflict. The key is to not to be so far off the mark that it becomes impossible to adjust once that character is revealed. This was said by Professor Sir Michael Howard. The period from 1945 to 1991 was marked by the Cold War that witnessed ideological and strategic rivalry between the United States and the former USSR led groups of states. The frequency of interstate armed conflict came down during the period mainly because of balance of power, existence of nuclear weapons and advancement in technology. However, the period of Cold War was also marked by decolonization, struggle for self-determination and struggle against political, social and economic injustice. It led to the emergence of non-state actors as a parties to conflict that were also used as a tools of proxy wars of one nation against other. The disintegration of Soviet Union in 1991 led to the end of Cold War and bipolarity in international system. You all must be read this in your political science and history classes. Attempts were made to broaden the definition of conflict to bring non-military dimensions of conflicts in international system. In September 2011, you all must have read in the newspaper, there was a terrorist attack in the United States. The terrorist attack in September 2011 radically transformed the discourse on conflict and security, and today we have an uncertain security scenario of quote, no war, no peace, unquote. With this introduction, I would like to give you the learning objective of this session. After listening and reading the material related to this unit, you will be able to understand evolution of meaning and scope of international conflict, that is how the international conflict have evolved over a period of time, what is the meaning of international conflict, changing types and patterns of international conflicts and contemporary manifestations and emerging trends in international conflicts. These are the three broad learning objectives. Based on these three learning objectives, I have prepared 2 half-an-hour lectures. The first part, now I am doing it. Then another half an hour, the extension of this first part of the lecture, I have prepared the another half an hour lecture. So, these 2 half-an-hour lectures based on this learning objectives. First, let us start with evolutions of meaning and scope of international conflict. In international relations literature, the realist paradigm, there is a 2 paradigm. The first one, the realist paradigm, for long dominated our understanding on conflict and security. The realist view on international conflicts is based on 2 major assumptions. First one is that states are prime actors in international system and international conflicts are conditioned by states' quest for security against external threats. Secondly, these threats are primarily military in nature and require the building up of military capability because conflicts are integral part of international system. According to this school of thought, sources of conflict are in the international system and interstate relationship. This understanding grew out of the realist demarcation between domestic order and international anarchy, where war is an ever-present possibility. The self-help system results in what realists call a security dilemma, which results in arms race that threaten overall security of the system. This is told by Kenneth Waltz in 1979 in his book. The page number is 102 to 104. This realist worldview was heavily influenced by the existence of nuclear weapons, great power rivalry and the balance of power. Now let us see the convergence of international and non-international conflicts. The international law regulating international armed conflicts also made clear distinction between international and non-international conflicts. International armed conflicts, commonly referred to as war, was understood by an armed conflict between 2 states and non-international conflict, that is civil war, as an armed conflict between a state and an internally located insurgent movement that had taken up arms. So, as learners, dear learners, now we have to we need to understand international and non-international conflicts. International law regulating international armed conflicts gave a clear distinction between international and non-international conflicts. So, let us understand very clearly. International armed conflicts, commonly referred to as war, was understood as an armed conflict between 2 states and non-international conflict, that is civil war, as an armed conflict between a state and an internally located insurgent movement that had taken up arms. Internal armed conflicts or civil wars were seen as domestic concerns outside the purview of international legal regimes because states were unwilling to allow international regulations in what they considered internal political issues. This dichotomy between international and non-international armed conflicts in international humanitarian law has been widely criticized. The intensity and brutality of the Spanish Civil War and the Second World War demonstrated to state that they needed to update the laws of war to include non-international armed conflicts also. So, now you must have understood the difference between international and non-international conflict. The International Committee of Red Cross presented a report in 1948 which recommended that the Geneva Conventions apply international humanitarian law in all cases of armed conflict which are not often international character, especially cases of civil war, colonial conflicts or war of religion, which may occur in the territory of one or more of the high contracting parties. Okay, this was stated by J. Pickett in 1960. We have taken reference from, as I have mentioned, J. Pickett in 1960. He wrote. So, however, the Geneva Conventions did not fully accept this proposal. They adopted Common Article 3, which defines non-international armed conflict as quote, armed conflict not of an international character occurring in the territory of one of the high contracting parties, unquote. So, now we need to define the international conflicts. Let us define international conflicts. Some of the prominent perspectives on international conflicts are given below. Okay, this we need to see how these academicians and experts in the area of international conflict, international relations perceive what is their perspectives on international conflicts. According to Quincy Wright, war is manifested by the physical struggle of armies to occupy the same space, each seeking to annihilate, disarm or capture the other, by the political struggle of nations to achieve policies against the resistance of others, by the ideological struggle of people to preserve or extend ways of life and value systems, and by the legal struggle of states to acquire titles, to vindicate claims, to prevent violence or to punish offenders by recognized procedures of regulated violence. Right, in 1942 this was taken, the page number 698. Singer defines, we have seen the how the Quincy Wright perceived the international conflict. Let us see how Singer defines the international conflict. Singer defines the conflict on the basis of political status of conflict parties. He makes the distinction between interstate wars, extra-systemic wars, but here adds two further classes of non-interstate conflict. Civil conflict, in which unlike one protagonist may be an insurgent or revolutionary group within the recognized territorial boundaries of the state, and the increasingly complex intra-state wars in the former colonial states, where the challenge may come from culturally defined groups whose members identify with one another or with the group on the basis of shared racial, ethnic, linguistic, religious or kinship characteristic. This was cited in Ramsbotham et al. In the year 2005, page number 65. So, according to K.J. Holsti, in his book The State, War and the State of War in 1996, published by Cambridge University Press, categorized international, that is interstate conflicts up to 1989 in terms of 24 issues grouped into 5 composite sets, that is conflict over territory, economics, nation state creation, ideology and human sympathy, that is ethnicity, religion, etc. He later focuses on non-interstate wars and bases his typology on types of actors and or objectives, ending up with 4 categories of conflict. That is, one is interstate wars. We can say that example we can give 1962 war between India and China, and armed interventions involving significant loss of life, that is the US intervention in Vietnam and USSR in Afghanistan. B is decolonizing wars of national liberation. C is internal wars based on ideological goals, and last one is the state nation wars, including armed resistance by ethnic, language or religious groups, often with the purpose of secession or separation from state. Example, Tamils in Sri Lanka, cited in Ramsbotham et al. In 2005. This was cited, these examples were cited by them in their books, the page number 65. According to the Stockholm International Peace Research Institute, a major armed conflict, that is unquote, is defined as the use of armed force between the military force of two or more governments and at least one organized armed group, resulting in the battle related death of at least 10,000 people in any single calendar year, and in which the incompatibility concerns control of government and or territory. The Uppsala conflict database, we have clearly talked about this, the Uppsala University department in our previous lecture. Based on their database, that Uppsala conflict database defines conflict as contested incompatibility that concerns government or territory or both, where the use of armed force between two parties result in at least 25 battle related deaths. Of these two parties, at least one has to be government of a state. Now let us see the changing nature of conflict. First one is generation of war model. According to that, this generation of war model, one of the prominent perspectives to understand the changing pattern of international conflict is generation of warfare model. The theory was described by US military strategist William S. Lind, Colonel Keith Nightingale, Captain John F. Schmidt, Joseph W. Sutton from USA, and Lieutenant Colonel Gary I. Wilson from US Marine Corps Gazette in 1989. Key point in the argument for generation of war is that changes in warfare are not driven by technology alone, but by political, economic, social and technical scale of the society. According to this theory, we are now moving into fourth and fifth generation of warfare. Key elements of this theory are given below. First generation warfare. This refers to battles fought with massive manpower using line and column tactics with uniformed soldiers governed by states. It can be traced back to creation of modern nation states after the Treaty of Westphalia, which firmly established the sovereignty of modern nation states with exclusive rights of governments to maintain their own military. Prominent examples were English Civil War, happened in 1642 to 1651, Napoleonic Wars 1803 to 1815 and American Civil War 1861 to 1865. The second generation of warfare, here in this generation, massed firepower replaced massed manpower. This tactics was used after the invention of breech loading rifled musket meant for longer range, greater accuracy and faster rates of fires. The prominent examples were First World War 1914 to 1918, Second World War 1939 to 1945. The third generation of warfare, it marked a shift from an industrial to mechanical era to mechanized warfare dominant. However, the response was at the level of ideas employed first by Germans in the First World War to counter the superior firepower of its adversaries. The focus in this generation of warfare was on using speed and surprise to bypass the enemy's line and collapse their forces from the rear. The fourth generation of warfare, this form of warfare is characterized by a blurring of lines between politics, combatants and civilians. It signifies the nation states' loss of their near monopoly on combat forces, returning to modes of conflict common in pre-modern times. This is the form of warfare in which one of the major participants is not a state but rather a violent non-state actor. So far, we have done generation of 4 warfare. So, these for preparing this unit and this lecture is part of these references. I have given the references. If you are anybody is interested to read further, you can read based on these references. For example, Armed Conflict Survey in 2005, it is published from ISIS London. Barry R. Posen, The Security Dilemma and Ethnic Conflict, and The Decline of Global Violence, Evidence, Explanation and Contestation, Human Security Report 2013, that is Human Security Report Project, Simon Fraser University. Frank Kitson, Low Intensity Operations, Subversions, Insurgency, Peacekeeping, Faber and Faber, London 1971. Jet Odermatt, New Wars and the International or Non-International Armed Conflict Dichotomy, and we have given the, for this we have given the web address also, like K. Subramaniam, his book on covert operations pose new challenges for Indian security, World Affairs volume 1 number 4 October to December 1977, like that K.G. Holsti, Ken Booth, Kenneth N. Martin Van Creveld, Oliver Ramsbotham et al. And Steven Pinker, Quincy Wright, Steven Pinker, Jet Odermatt, Radams. So, these are the references we have given. So, you can, if anybody is interested to go further to know these topics in very deep, you can read these books and you can very well you can read and you can understand more deeply. Thank you so much. In the next lecture, I will continue this topic.